Thanks so much for joining us, Alyssa and Rachel. Welcome to WISP Presents, everyone, how I got into sports tech. Really excited today to be talking about Major League Baseball analytics. So for those of you who aren't familiar with WISP, we're a nonprofit that focuses on driving growth opportunities for women in the space. Just trying to change the ratio and making improvements. I'll hand it off to Sydney to go through our introductions.
And yeah, Lydia and I are volunteers with WISP, and we're excited to have you guys here today. So we have Alyssa Clark. She is the project manager and customer service representative at Diamond Kinetics, a baseball and softball technology company which specializes in mobile motion technology and information that enables player development, superior equipment fitting, objective scouting and recruiting, and engagement-driven entertainment. Prior to joining the Diamond Kinetics team, Alyssa was a student athlete on the softball team at Virginia Tech. Go Hokies. Like Alyssa, Rachel was also a collegiate softball player and was a student athlete at the University of New Mexico. As many of you have recently heard, Rachel Balkovec is the first female full-time hitting coach in Major League Baseball for the New York Yankees. In 2012, Rachel accepted the role of minor league strength and conditioning coordinator for the St. Louis Cardinals, working with the Johnson City Cardinals in Tennessee, and became the first full-time female strength and conditioning coach in the history of professional baseball. In 2016, Rachel was hired by the Houston Astros to be their Latin American strength and conditioning coordinator. In 2018, she was promoted to be the Class AA Corpus Christi Hooks strength and conditioning coach. Rachel then moved to the Netherlands to pursue a second master's degree in biomechanics, where she worked with the Dutch national baseball and softball teams. Prior to joining the Yankees, she worked at Driveline Baseball, researching hitters' eye tracking and pitchers' hip movement. And now Rachel is proudly repping pinstripes, and we're lucky to have her and Alyssa here today. Very impressive list of accomplishments from both of you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Sydney. So we'll transition into some opening questions. We'll do a quick speed round, and then we'll go to the questions that were submitted. So my first question is, what do your day-to-day responsibilities look like, and what adjustments have you had to make since COVID?
Go ahead, Alyssa.
All right. So I actually haven't had to make that many adjustments myself. I'm pretty used to working remote. My job as a customer experience representative, as well as a project manager, allows me to do that. I kind of joke that as long as I have my phone and computer, I can work wherever. But for COVID, I've had to watch my entire company learn how to work remote instead of just it being me and all of them back in Pittsburgh. My day-to-day operations are, I start with answering any customer support tickets that come in overnight. I do use our database in SQL to help answer those tickets, as well as some Java tools. And then I move into a project management role where I work on any projects I have going on, like user guides or FAQs. I handle all of our outward-facing support content. And then I meet with our marketing team some, and I test any new features and app builds that we have going out. So it's not uncommon if I get to go swing a bat during the day or throw a pitch or something like that. So it's kind of my day.
Mine is totally different than before COVID, as everyone can probably imagine. But I was in camp for 6 weeks before everything was canceled. So, I mean, Jay was a pretty typical hitting coach, I guess. We'd show up and have some coaches meetings, and then get going with like our drills and stuff that guys are doing individually to maybe change their mechanics or work on something with their eye tracking or whatever that is. And then moving into just more of the meat of our like training in the cages, and then go out on the field and do some either batting practice on the field for the day, or we were just starting to get into games. So, and now I'm remote coaching and sending a lot of videos back and forth with guys and trying to use as much video analysis software that we can do to kind of help them, guide them as they're at home doing, you know, some of them are working with almost nothing as far as equipment goes, and some of them are fully stocked. So we just kind of have to cater to what they have at home, and if they have the opportunity to get live at bats. Some people don't even have baseballs, so working on that too is important. So yeah, so now I'm remote coaching for the Yankees, but hopefully we'll get back on the field in a couple of months. We'll see. So
Awesome. And yeah, I'm sure being at spring training for the first few weeks was super exciting.
Yeah.
You looked great in those pinstripes, and as a big Yankee fan myself, so that was exciting. So I know that, Rachel, your journey to becoming a MLB hitting coach has been a long, rocky road. For those of you who don't know, Rachel changed her name to Ray on resumes just to get noticed. Can you speak about some of the challenges you faced?
Yeah, I felt bad for you reading my bio. I was like, you can take a breather, Sydney, if you need to. I bounced around quite a bit and kind of just done different things. So I started out as a strength and conditioning coach, and then transferred over to hitting. And when I first got in, 2012, I wasn't the only woman on the player development side. There was Sue Falsoni, who was a physical therapist. There was a couple of athletic trainers, but definitely like in my immediate vision, there were 0 women. So the whole season, I saw no other women. And now it's really cool to see like there's a lot of nutritionists, mental skills coaches. There are, of course, some on-field coaches popping up, more strength coaches, that kind of thing. It's been massive growth in 5 years. But yeah, when I was first getting in, it just was completely unheard of for there to be a woman in the dugout. And there were no strength coaches, of course. So I was having a heck of a time. Long story short, was having a heck of a time. And I was, I didn't change my name on my resume the first day. I changed it after I was having some trouble getting in and getting responses from people. And so, I don't know, I just was on the phone with my sister one day and she was like, well, have you ever thought about changing your name to a guy's name? And I was like, and then I was like, oh, it's a good idea. So I changed my name and I got like immediate response. This was 2013. I had sat out a year of baseball because I was discriminated against pretty like outwardly. And I just knew what I was facing. So I changed my name to see if I could at least get on the phone with somebody that I might impress them. And it worked really quickly. And then I felt really bad after that, not for lying, but it led to some very, very awkward interactions once they found out I was a woman. So, but what that did do, at least, like when I got the immediate responses, I was like, okay, wow, like my resume actually is good. And so it kind of gave me like this extra little, ironically, it gave me like hope because I knew that my resume was actually good. And the reason why I wasn't getting calls, I was getting ghosted because of my gender and not because of, the work that I was doing wasn't getting noticed. So, but that was a long time ago now. So like this time around when I was hired as a hitting coach, I've already made so many connections and just relationships in baseball that I don't want to say it was easy because it wasn't, but it just, it felt a lot easier than the first time for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And that's Rachel and I, we go back to about 5 years ago, and I really wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach. And all the calls I had were with men, which was fine. And that was pretty much expected. But then I was just doing a Google search and then found your story, and was just absolutely blown away. And that's what really drew me to connect. And it's really motivated me too, just to make, join women's sports tech and just help make positive change. So awesome. Well, our next question, Alyssa, so as a former Division I athlete myself, I think we can both agree that technology definitely makes a difference. How do you draw on your experiences as a former athlete while you develop Diamond Kinetics softball product stack? Can you speak to the importance of being a former softball player and knowing the game when working on the product?
Yeah, so in my college career, I kind of had a couple different roles and I can pull from each one of those. I was obviously recruited to play softball, so I know what it's like and what you need to do to get to a college and how competitive it is. I was a college athlete for 2 years until I got injured and then I couldn't play anymore. But I switched over to a manager standpoint, so I got to see it from a different perspective as not being the one playing, but helping the players out. And so I could pull from each of those roles into what I do now and helping to develop the tech that we have. But I didn't really get to use my softball knowledge until we started to do our pitch tracker softball. So we have a couple different products at Diamond Kinetics. We have our swing tracker sensor, which goes on the bat, but that's used for both baseball and softball because the swing motions are relatively the same. The pitch tracker ball is essentially a smart ball that connects to your phone, and it gets you a lot of information and data from the pitching motion and the pitch itself. And obviously the pitching motions between softball and baseball are very different. And the softball pitching motion is not as looked at as much as the baseball one is. The metrics that we measure, like spin direction and spin rate, aren't talked about in softball really at all as they are in baseball. So when we're developing it, we measure spin direction. And in baseball, you know what the spin direction is supposed to be for a fastball or for a curveball or slider or something like that. In softball, you don't. And so when we developed our baseball, we knew, okay, we know that the spin direction for a fastball is supposed to be 12-6. And so you test it by throwing it and making sure that the product comes back with the correct spin direction. In softball, we didn't know that. So there was a lot of afternoons where I would sit down with some of our developers and show them, this is how you throw a fastball in softball or a drop ball. This is how the spin moves. This is how the pitch moves. What spin direction should that be? And then going to test the product and coming back and saying, okay, it is a 6 o'clock spin for a fastball or a drop ball. It is a 12 o'clock for a rise ball. That physically makes sense with the science, and that's what we're seeing. So that must be what it is. It was a lot more research. And so it was a lot of conversations around the softball pitching motion, the softball pitches, the types, and nobody really had that in our company. So it was a lot around me, which is fun because we had a lot of impromptu pitching lessons with me and our developers and our coworkers where I would try and show them the pitching motion, which is really fun because it's a hard motion, and to teach it to a lot of people who don't know it, it's a very interesting sight to see. So, but that's how a lot of my softball knowledge kind of helped develop these products.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the importance of having, women and then people in general with diverse backgrounds, like working on the product side, because if you have a lot of men in the room, you might not be making a product that fully, it doesn't have an understanding of the sport itself, I guess, and that's so important. So that's great to hear. For Rachel, so how have you used technology and analytics throughout your career to differentiate yourself as a hitting coach? I would assume there's, maybe some old school hitting coaches who are less receptive to using analytics. Are there certain metrics that stand out to you as critically important?
I mean, tech is basically why I have my job, so I, thankfully, I can't even tell you exactly why, but I've always been really receptive to technology in the game. And I came in when it was like just getting started, like it was just creeping in. Catapult had started in Australia, but hadn't made it to the United States. I remember 2014 sitting in on a meeting for ZEP, which was like an early bat sensor, which obviously Alyssa knows about. I don't even know if they're still around, but that was before Blast Motion. And 2014, I was sitting in a room with a bunch of tenured men in baseball. And I was just like asking all these questions, writing everything down. I'm like, where's your data coming from? What kind of players do you have it on? And they just were like, yeah, like, that's lame. I'm like, that was 2014. So how much we've changed, So I've just always really bought into it. It seems really natural to me. And I've had also some really awesome mentors. And I mean, as a strength coach, so, right, that was 2014, 2018 as a strength coach in AA for the Astros, I was managing 8 different technologies. Not every day, every one of them, but like I had 8 technologies that our sports scientist was putting into a dashboard that I was responsible for understanding those numbers and applying them to our programming, those kinds of things. So it's everything. And then as a hitting coach, now transitioning, I transitioned right when I left the Astros, when I went to the Netherlands to get another master's degree. I was in the Netherlands and I was like using, we weren't using a ton of technology there. However, their virtual reality research in the Netherlands is huge. So being exposed to that, and then also going to Driveline. I don't know who is all is familiar on this call with Driveline, but Driveline baseball is basically like the mashing of a research lab and baseball performance. Like it's the full integration of that. So they're doing, they have 2 research grade biomechanics labs. We've got the eye tracking glasses, which I was fortunate to be able to use there. And so I think we're in a weird time in baseball and probably in many industries where people, younger people, minorities, people just that wouldn't normally get opportunities are getting the opportunities because we're well-versed in the technology. And so simply the ability for me to come into an organization and look at the stats page and be able to break that down and really readily apply that to being a coach puts me ahead of some people that might have a lot more experience than me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's so important in differentiating yourself, because as things become more and more tech focused, being able to kind of add that human touch to the metrics will be increasingly important. And that's how, even scouts have been successful over the past 10 years in a crowded market. So that's awesome. So now we're going to move to a quick speed round for you guys to hear about some of the things that you guys enjoy or whatnot. And I'm going to start with favorite books. And if you guys have any analytics or sports books that you recommend for the audience, feel free to prioritize those.
You go ahead.
I mean, I don't, but I could tell you a million articles, but I haven't read a lot of like stats books per se. My favorite books are like Seneca, which is Stoic philosophy, and I'm not much of I wouldn't say that I'm like a book nerd in that way. I'm much more of a reading research articles from that perspective. So if anyone is curious, for example, on eye tracking is probably one of the areas that I'm most well versed in the research. You could look at I'll even put it in the chat really quick just for spelling. But like Dr. Mann is one of the most well-known people, I would say, in virtual reality and also eye tracking. He's at the university that I went to school with in the Netherlands. That's part of why I went there, is because he's one of the leading researchers in the world for eye tracking, actually for cricket, but getting into baseball. And then you've got like Sean Mueller, Rob Gray, same thing. Rob Gray is out of Arizona State University, and then Peter Fatty. Like any research by those guys, I would say that's like my book recommendation.
I love reading. I love reading historical fiction. So my favorite book is called The Wolf and the Whale. And I also love any Outlander series, and I'm currently reading a series on Tudor England. So I'm a wholehearted fiction kind of reader, always have my nose in a book. For baseball books, I would there's a book called The Physics of Baseball, which is very informational and like a lot of physics, obviously, because it's the physics of baseball. It's not really my cup of tea when reading, but it would definitely help fill in any gaps that I use in my job, because that's kind of what our company is based on, is the physics and the science in baseball. So I feel like I should read that because of my job, but that would probably be like the baseball analysis book to read.
Awesome. What are your favorite podcasts for both of you?
Again, so there's I do actually listen to the Perception to Action podcast.
We can also send out a list of all the things that you guys mentioned after the webinar for our attendees. So
I listen to Perception to Action. That's Rob Gray's podcast, and he actually does a lot of great work with, it's applied to every sport, but he talks a lot about baseball because that's kind of his area. And then I actually love Julie Foudy, Laughter Permitted. So I assume there's a lot of women on this call. She is hilarious. And she's obviously, if you don't know who she is, she's a former Olympic soccer player and kind of one of like the founding mothers, if you will, of like U.S. women's soccer. And she's just hilarious. She's an announcer for ESPN and also does a podcast for them called Laughter Permitted. She has incredible female guests on there. So I listen to that and I highly recommend it. That's one of them. I'm definitely a podcast junkie, so I could go on for a while there.
I think I'm kind of the opposite. I don't really listen to a lot of podcasts. If I do, it's probably Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell. He's an author. He wrote Outliers and Blink, and I really love those books.
Favorite podcast.
He's a sociologist, which is what my major was. So my mind of thinking is kind of along that. So that's my go-to if I do listen to a podcast.
My boss is on this call, and he just slacked me Revisionist History because everyone knows I make everyone listen to it. There's a new episode today, so I'm a big Malcolm Gladwell fan. And I think that also speaks to, the importance of just like the things that he covers in that podcast might seem completely unrelated to sports at all. There was one episode about kind of weak links on analytics in soccer, which I found so interesting. And he spoke about like one of the things that he spoke about was the education system and prioritizing not maybe having schools with huge endowments, but having schools for everyone. But things like that I find super fascinating. And also I think we can always learn from them and apply them to our work or get new ideas, just even from things that might not seem related to analytics.
Yeah, exactly. I love him. He's great.
Awesome. And what's your guys' favorite place that you traveled?
Oh, Lydia knows this is a hard question for me.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
I'm gonna go to New Zealand, hands down.
Yes.
I'm taking full credit right now, but I convinced Lydia to move to New Zealand.
Yeah, we were on a call and I was like, I was in grad school. I was like, I could do this, or I could just book a one-way ticket to New Zealand.
And I was like, book a one-way ticket now.
Yep. I think I did it like right after. But I need to go back.
Yeah, I'm an avid traveler, but I would say if you're planning any travel, just cancel it and go straight to New Zealand because it's probably the best.
There you go.
But yeah, Alyssa, you've been a lot of places too.
Yeah, I lived in Guam for a while, which is my absolute hand down favorite place. It is a tiny island in the Pacific Ocean. I think it's like 11 miles long. That's my favorite place. My favorite traveled trip is probably Iceland. I've been to Bali actually pretty recently this last year, but I just love the culture and the sights and the landscapes in Iceland. It is, after you go to New Zealand, go to Iceland because it is absolutely amazing. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, I almost booked a flight there because it's actually not too expensive for
really
Boston
cheap.
either.
It's not. I think they closed down one of the airlines, but it was a pretty cheap flight to get out there, and it's gorgeous out there. It's beautiful.
It's really cheap to fly there, but it's so expensive once you get there.
It's expensive when that's the trade-off. It is a cheap flight.
Anyway.
Definitely put that on my list. So now we have our audience submitted questions. So for both of you, there's always going to be people that are apprehensive to adopt analytics and a data-driven approach. Alyssa, when working with customers who may not see the value, how do you articulate it?
So I always have to feed off of the customer because you do get people who aren't willing to adapt to it. So you kind of have to read them and see how willing are they to dive into the metrics and how far are they willing to dive into the metrics. Luckily, we do have, with both hitting and pitching, there are metrics that are easier to understand. So for hitting, there's max barrel speed, which is just the speed of your bat. And from there, once you initiate that and they understand that, you can move into some of the other metrics. And I like to think my job for customer support is more than just fixing their problems, but also helping them simplify the metrics and connect the dots. So if we understand max barrel speed, we can move on to impact momentum, which is an intimidating metric. And that's sometimes I think why people balk at the metrics and the data, because it intimidates them and it's science and physics. But all impact momentum is it is determined by the max barrel speed and the weight of the bat. And that's it. And it's how much momentum your bat has when it hits the ball. And if they can understand that, they kind of can make that connection and go, oh, that's really not that scary. And then the next step is, well, how does that necessarily help you? And if it goes off of the weight of the bat, well, maybe you can try a heavier bat if your impact momentum is still going up. And if it starts to plateau or drop off, maybe you've reached your maximum bat weight. And just connecting those dots with the metrics really helps them kind of open up to maybe looking at the rest of them or all of the data that we're presenting instead of just skimming the surface with what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, that definitely makes a ton of sense. And then for Rachel, I guess you commented on how, you got your job because you're quick to adopt technology. Have you faced any difficulties in working with players who are apprehensive to the metrics themselves and kind of, think maybe everything is the eye test, or, they play the game so they know? And if so, how do you work with those players to get them to understand the value of analytics?
I'm probably not a good person to ask about this one, because I was in the Astros organization for 3 years, and they were like, when I got there, they were like way ahead of everyone else. Like, they were just like, now I think, now they might be more, it's more normal now. But when I got there, they were already like full speed ahead into data. And so a lot of the younger players that I was working with in the minor leagues were, that was kind of all they knew. I was fortunate to, like, they had already started that transition, I think 2 or 3 years prior to me arriving in that organization. It's more so that I've dealt with coaches, which is honestly, it's moving so fast, where coaches that don't embrace it are losing opportunities. So I would say that compared to what I've heard in other parts of the industry, I feel like I've been really lucky. Because of the organization that I worked in with the Astros and now with the Yankees. It's just how it is. So when the players come in, it's really not a question of if they're going to do it or not, or if they're going to buy in. It's just, this is how the Yankees do it. And especially because of that brand in itself, the Yankees, they're pretty willing. So yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with like horrible, at the very least, they're willing to try it. And like Alyssa said, like the main things, like exit velocity and launch it, like just very basic concepts. They're pretty willing to buy into it, I think.
Yeah, it's great to see that standard is shifting and just more people are familiar with it. Because I know being an athlete, a lot of times we would question the metrics, or I think some of us would just be like upset or nervous because it would just keep us more accountable. Our coaches could see our effort levels. But
I think, especially with the Yankees we saw last year, so many of them who got hurt, and they were calling up their minor league players, and they were succeeding like beyond. Everyone was kind of in disbelief how incredible it was that it would just, Judge was hurt. It was like they were dropping like flies last year. But that probably speaks to the fact that these players embrace a ton of the tools that they have, and or know how to play to their strengths, especially because it was almost like people thought it was perhaps like, oh, this is a miracle team. But at the same time, when it was, a bunch of guys who hadn't started on the roster, but it's also probably like, well, this is what happens when you understand data and how to sort of pair that with your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Our next question we have is, how do you see more women getting into baseball analytics or in the front office?
I would say for women who are looking to do that, they definitely need to take advantage of opportunities that are given to them, and internships are super helpful. I interned at Diamond Kinetics every summer that I was in college before I got a full-time job there. And to just stay around the sport, you don't necessarily have to have played. You didn't have to play in college. You don't have to play. If you just love the sport and you're around it, I think that really helps. We have a lot of people at Diamond Kinetics on our team that haven't played baseball, but they know the statistics better than I do. They probably follow MLB more than I do and could name like all of the past like champions and could name the entire like Pirates roster, or in Pittsburgh, so I have to say Pirates. But they follow it so much more than I do, even though they haven't played. So having a background in the sport doesn't necessarily determine if like you can have a future in the tech with it. And also being able to adapt to different things. So my bachelor's degree is in sociology. I didn't do a computer science. I wasn't an engineer. I don't have any developer really background, but yet I work in sports tech. When I came into Diamond Kinetics, I took a couple courses on Code Academy, which is a really great place to learn a little bit of coding, because I had to learn some CSS and HTML coding language to do other parts of my job. And it's that ability to adapt and be open to learning different things that definitely help you kind of find a spot in this sports tech world.
Alyssa, I was just laughing because I didn't grow up as a baseball fan. I grew up as a softball fan, if anything. And so people are like, oh yeah, you know, like the 1996 World Series when so-and-so. And I'm like, no. I'm like, but do you know who Monica Abbott is?
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't think so. Yeah, I feel a little bit fish out of water sometimes because of that stuff, because there are definitely people who are more invested. In fact, part of what I'm doing during COVID is just watching a lot of MLB games from last year. So yeah, I think that I love that what you said about internships and being willing to, the original question is, how do we get more women into these jobs? I would say apply is number one. Like, I think that people, it's like, we need more women in these jobs and it's not fair and we got to get, and I'm like, I've been on the receiving end of resumes in professional baseball for strength and conditioning coaches. I was a coordinator for 3 years with the Astros. I think I can count on one hand how many female applicants we had, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of resumes. So first of all, apply and like do the internships in your college. And maybe, like I always tell, especially women, you should apply for those male dominated positions, especially when you're younger, because it's easier to get an internship as a woman in a male dominated sports field than it is to get hired full time. But if you do what Alyssa did, or you do what I did and do all those internships where they're kind of like, yeah, okay, we'll let this girl come in here. What's she gonna, it's just an intern, right? Like, it's a short term, we'll try it out, see how this girl does, you know, like, so I just interned and interned and interned and interned. I mean, I think I had 7 unpaid internships on my resume by the time I got a full-time job. And then even this like second time around, after being in baseball for 6 years, I still did an internship in the Netherlands for 10 months, working as a like part-time hitting coach, and got paid nothing, $0. And then I went to Driveline and was an intern and got paid less money than could pay my bills every month at the age of 31. So do the internships, apply for all of the jobs. I just am like, well, we can't solve the problem of getting more women in if women aren't applying. And then if the women pooled applicants is tiny, that means you get the least qualified women, because it's just what you have available and not a full gamut of really unexperienced and really experienced women. It's really just like, well, we've got 3 female resumes and 200. Guess we've got to choose one of these, even though none of them are qualified. So yeah. I think it's a combination of things, but that's for sure part of it.
And I would just echo that, because I think I was talking about this with my mom the other day, and she was saying that she was on a call and there was a stat that women always read the job description and are like, well, I don't have all these qualifications. Whereas like I have 4 brothers, they would probably just be like, oh, I'm applying without reading it. And so that's part of it, is that because of that, you know, you might not think that you meet all the qualifications. You might meet 4 out of 5 of them and then not apply, versus the person who ends up getting chosen might have only met 2 out of 5, but they were the best person of all, you know, the available applicants. And I think I'm even looking at the audience submitted questions. We have a ton of people who ask what experiences are necessary. And I think that, you know, a ton of women in the space focus on having like exactly the correct experiences, because we almost think that we need that in order to be qualified. Whereas what you guys are really saying is just, you know, work hard, look for opportunities, but then just go for it.
You know, and that's an interesting, so before I even knew that was like a statistic, when I was still like in my million internship phase and I just was trying to get a full-time job, I applied for Latin American coordinator for the Astros, and I ended up not getting it, but I applied, and I think my email was like, I sent my resume and I was like, I know I don't have any of the qualifications that you listed. I wish I could find that email. It's so prime, because no young women do that. And I just was like, I know I'm the right person for this job. And I didn't have the exact qualifications they listed, but I knew that I had other things that could take the place of that, and other skills that could, you know, and I actually I got to the last part of the interview and I wasn't fluent enough in Spanish. Segue to just, I don't want to skip this question. How important is it to know several languages for coaching? It's everything. So learning Spanish for baseball, I would say, is like, it's almost like having another degree, because 50% of the players sometimes don't speak English. So it's so important. And it's another thing that I think helped me get a job when I was, I still am a woman, but when I was trying to break in as a woman into the field, for sure, speaking Spanish was absolutely critical. I mean, critical for me to get a position, and it opened up doors for me to be a Latin American coordinator as a white woman from Nebraska. Like, what? How did I even get that job? But I spoke Spanish, and I learned it quickly because I knew that would be so valuable.
Definitely. And I guess, yeah, that also speaks to a lot of times when people are posting the job, they don't know exactly what they're looking for. So that's why I just go for it. Another interesting question we had is, for Rachel, what are one of the top 1 or 2 challenges or pain points when conducting live and remote hitting training?
Getting players to respond when you see they put stories up on Instagram.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, just the kind of the generation we're dealing with is just like, they're like getting them to like call you on the phone and have a conversation is difficult. That's one of my current pain points. It's like texting is okay. Sometimes I will just DM them on Instagram, and that's the fastest way to get a hold of some of the players. So finding a way to communicate effectively with a generation of humans that have been raised in a time where effective communication has completely changed or is not existent. So that's one of them. I would also say, like, we have a world-class facility with the Yankees. So we've got all the technology available that you could possibly want. So kind of catering to players who, some of them didn't have baseballs there for a long time during COVID. Were stuck at a hotel and they were hitting sunflower seeds. So I think just adjusting without technology and going back to just good old, like, what I see in the video type of thing. And I mean, the thing is, like, we have iPhones, so we got slow motion video and there's the things you can do. But it's definitely limiting in that way. I think.
Well, yeah, I never even thought to use Instagram to communicate with athletes. All right, so now I'm just going through our live questions. All right, so we have right here, what type of video analysis are you doing? Is there an option to employ remote technology? I have done some research by rigging Dance Dance Revolution mats to mimic force plates.
Yeah, good. Again, it's just like, the thing is we have a lot of players, so we just work with whatever they have. Again, some people didn't have baseballs. Some guys have a facility where they have hit tracks, so we're getting their data from hit tracks. Some guys have their blast motion sensors. Some guys don't. Like, it just depends on what they have available to them. So the type of video analysis is really just like whatever they send me. Trying to get them just to take a video at the proper angle is a challenge in itself. So getting a video that's consistent with some of the other angles that we have from our video internally is important. And it's just regular old, like, iPhone video or whatever they have. And then we might use like Huddle Technique or iMovie or something to get kind of creative with some of the video stuff that we're doing. That's awesome that you're rigging Dance Dance Revolution mats to mimic force plates. I love that. I think that, yeah, if they have those mats available, that'd be awesome.
Awesome. One other question, I guess this will be our last question of the day. So you talked about some positives of tech that we hadn't thought about before, or that I hadn't thought about before from the question, but wondering what concerns you have about the use of tech and data in baseball. Also wondering if you and your athletes reflect on data collected by sports tech together. It's a hard philosophical kind of question.
Alyssa, do you have anything on that one?
It's kind of against like what I think, because it's a sports tech company, but I do think there's always the basics in it. Like, having played softball since I was like 4 years old, and my sister and my brother playing baseball and softball, there's always, the squash the bug, or like all of those old kind of basic, I'm trying to think of the word, but like hitting mechanics that you always go back to. And I think tech, the nice thing about tech is you can simplify it as much as you want, or you can really dive into it as much as you want. But the mechanics of the swing don't change. And I think it's kind of up to hitting coaches like you, what you prefer to do, if you really want to go into the tech or use it as little as you want. But I don't know if there's a point where you can get too over the top and use too much tech, where it takes away the fun. And you have players who just aren't going to accept tech because it takes away from the America pastime of it, and it's no longer the fun baseball game that they like. And you're just going to have different types of players. But I don't know if you can get too over the top with it at times.
I agree. I just don't. Again, I'm brainwashed because I was with the Astros and then going to the Netherlands, and I've sought out these experiences that are basically like high amounts of tech. I don't think there's too much. I think the way you communicate is important, and I think educating the players thoroughly so they're not confused. I don't think that less information. I don't think the answer is less information. I think how you present the information is more important than the amount of information. I say we, like the places I've been, I don't think, in fact, I'm positive this is not standard everywhere. And I'm sure, Alyssa, you deal with this, is like, I talk to people from other organizations and they're like, are you guys using Rapsodo? And I'm like, yeah, 4 years ago. Where have you been? Like, oh my gosh. So I've been like so fortunate and just brainwashed by really high tech environments. Like Driveline is like, everything is data. Astros, everything is data. So we believe firmly in, we believe firmly in showing the players their data. Whereas there are a lot of teams and organizations that just collect the data and don't show the players, which I'm firmly against. I think if it's one surefire way to get players to not buy into data, it's by not showing them the data. So then they're doing, sometimes they're doing extra work to like make sure they've got their sensors or their catapult or whatever. They're doing this extra work and then they never see the data. That's when they truly do get pissed off. Like that's when, or if there's inconsistent data and it's really bad. So I just think that like being forward facing, which is with as much data as possible, I always want to cater to the athlete that's the most high functioning, because the ones that aren't as interested can just pick and choose what they want. But the guys who want the most, they should get the most. So I always want to cater to the highest common denominator, not the lowest common denominator. And that applies to data as well.
That's and I think the important thing, is the swing's not going to change. Like the baseball, softball swing, it's the same swing. You're focusing on the same stuff. The data that you get isn't going to change that. It's just going to help you improve it. And I think that's where it can get lost sometimes, that data is going to change the game of baseball when it's not necessarily. It's just going to help players get better quicker in different aspects.
Definitely. And I think, transparency is definitely the key, and not pulling it out of context, like you were saying. So not, just giving someone who might want a more granular picture, like one sort of random stat out of context, but being able to give them the whole picture. That's awesome. I think Lydia is going to transition now to close out the event, but these were awesome answers, and we're really lucky that we got to hear from both of you guys today. Both of you girls today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Alyssa and Rachel. So it's definitely the highlight of my Thursday. Great to have you on. So I do have a few action items just to help change the ratio. Number one would be to sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already on our website. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, our social media accounts. And then actually, I did want to mention, because I know, Rachel, there are the I'm Not Done Yet t-shirts on your Instagram. We can include the link in the email because the donations are going to charities supporting women.
For women, important for women. Just quickly, for anyone who doesn't, I don't really sell anything on my Instagram, but I use the hashtag, it's I'm Not Done Yet, and it's just really perpetuating like continual growth, and also just like I'm not done yet in the world. So like, what can you do for your community or for your industry, which is, awesome that you ladies are doing this. And it's available. I mean, we're almost sold out. I had no idea I was going to sell that well, so we're almost sold out, but I'm making no money off of this. All the profit goes to Charity for Women. So if you want to check it out, that's you can figure out how to do that on my link in my bio on Instagram.
Sweet. All right. And then last thing, actually, founder Nina